Hey there, everyone. That sexy nerd is back again. And hi, everybody. You thought we were all done with... you guys all thought we were done with... You guys thought we were done with the Crimean War, but we're back again because I remember him saying something that we were gonna go focus back on the Light Brigade because I didn't understand. I was so lost. If you go back and watch that video, I was so lost when that video came up. I was like, I don't what's going on here. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't follow it, and everybody's like, oh, and certain subscriber out there is like, the Light Brigade and this and that and the other, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'd never even heard of the poem that he was even based on. So it's a good thing now I get to learn a little bit more about the Light Brigade. And I couldn't be happier for it. So, not much to say. Let's just get into the episode. And remember, please smash that like button if you want to see more sexy and dirty content. And subscribe if you think I deserve it. And let's do this thing, y'all.
Crimea, October 20th. Balaclava, Crimea.
Balaclava!
October 25th, 1854, 10:45 a.m. From a ridgeline, a general gazes down on the battlefield. His name is Baron Raglan, and he's been directing the action for the past 5 hours. Suddenly, he spots movement on a distant ridge. Enemy troops, dragging away cannons they'd captured earlier in the battle. Raglan's hero, the Duke of Wellington, never lost a gun, and Raglan swears he won't suffer that dishonor. So, he scribbles an order to his cavalry reserve, the Light Brigade, waiting in the valley below. Advance rapidly to the front, follow the enemy, and try to prevent the enemy from carrying away the guns. He watches as the cavalry sets off. But hold on, he realizes there's been a terrible mistake. They're not riding toward the intended target, but down a valley bristling with enemy artillery, riding to death and immortality.
Immortality?
Thanks so much to 80,000 Hours for sponsoring this episode. If you're looking for a career path where you can have a positive impact on the world, then stick around until after the show because they might be able to help you find your dream job for free.
Okay. Why? I don't know why. I immediately, as soon as they advertised that, I was just immediately thought of 127 hours.
In episode 4 of our Crimean War series, we talked briefly about the charge of the Light Brigade, a terrible blunder that became one of the most famous events in military history. And while that episode looked at the wider context, we really wanted to circle back and explore the mechanics of how and why it all happened. But first, a little recap.
Yeah, see?
On October 25th, 1854, a Russian army attacked the Allied Ottoman, British, and French port of Balaclava, which acted as a vital supply link for the Allied forces besieging the Russian port of Sevastopol. While the Russians initially captured a series of hilltop forts, a regiment of Scottish Highlanders halted their progress. After that, a British cavalry unit, the Heavy Brigade, counterattacked and defeated the main body of Russian cavalry. Throughout this, the British Light Brigade remained in reserve. While the Heavy Brigade were line breakers, the Light Brigade was intended for reconnaissance, flanking, and pursuing fleeing enemies. Yet after watching the Heavies in action, the Light Brigade was eager to win glory as well, so Baron Raglan decided to give it to them. A 65-year-old veteran, the commander of the Allied forces had fought under Wellington and lost his arm at Waterloo, but that was 39 years before, and Raglan hadn't seen combat since. At Balaclava, Raglan observed the battle from the heights above, and when he realized Russian troops were trying to evacuate guns they'd captured from the forts earlier in the day, he saw an opportunity to use the Light Brigade. He scribbled a vague order to his cavalry commander, Earl Lucan, directing him to send the Light Brigade to cut off this retreat, and handed it to a messenger. Now, that messenger, Captain Louis Nolan, was a keen horseman and military theorist.
I don't know. As soon as I saw this guy, I'm like, he looks like he doesn't take things seriously.
Who also had a fiery temper and an utter disdain for Lord Lucan, who he mocked and called Lord Look-On because Lucan had held his forces back and watched during the earlier Battle of Alma.
Okay.
So, carrying Raglan's message,
Kinda wrong.
Nolan reached Lucan. Despite being an officer since 1816, Lucan had never fought in a battle before the Crimean War. In fact, he was more known for his ostentation, spending so much money on lavish uniforms that one of his regiments had been nicknamed Bingham's Dandies. Now, as far as the order was concerned, what Raglan wrote made sense, but only from his vantage point. The Light Brigade was ideally suited to capture the Russian artillery on the heights. The problem was, from where Lucan was looking, he couldn't see them. Raglan was looking at the situation from above, Lucan from below. So, confused at this order being delivered to him, Lucan asked Nolan for clarification. In response, Nolan insisted. Lord Raglan's orders are that the cavalry should attack immediately. Attack, sir? Barked Lucan. Attack what? What guns, sir? Nolan, exasperated, gave a wide sweep of his arm, a wave that not only encompassed the ridge with the retreating cannons, but also Russian fortifications in the throat of the valley over a mile away. Both sides of that valley bristled with Russian artillery and infantry. Any force that entered it would ride through a kill zone of 50 cannons and 20 infantry battalions,
It's no man's
aka
land.
a clearly suicidal attack. There, my lord, is your enemy, Nolan declared. There are your guns. Lucan, annoyed and embarrassed by Nolan's tone, didn't question the orders again. He then told Nolan to carry the instructions to Earl Cardigan, who held direct command of the Light Brigade. A soldier since 1824, Cardigan was also a peacetime officer like Lucan and Raglan. Renowned for his aristocratic arrogance, he'd clashed with other officers on numerous occasions, including fighting several duels. He also, like Nolan, had a special distaste for Lucan, who happened to be his brother-in-law. Understandably, Cardigan also questioned Raglan's order, but when Nolan's response implied that Cardigan was afraid, he furiously replied, "If I come through this alive, I will have you court-martialed for speaking to me in that manner." Then when Nolan left, Cardigan pointed out to Lucan how well defended the valley was. "I cannot help that," Lucan said. "It is Lord Raglan's positive order that the Light Brigade is to attack the enemy." Yeah, a vague order
Charging
made due
stuff.
to military inexperience, miscommunicated, exacerbated by battlefield terrain, and filtered through a tangled mess of overweening aristocratic privilege and personal feuds. That is what put in motion what came next. 11:10 a.m. The Light Brigade advances, past the intended target. Oh no. Realizing the disaster is afoot, Nolan rides out in front of the formation, shouting and waving desperately. No one can hear him, so he comes closer to Lord Cardigan and...
Oh!
The first Russian shell bursts above, Nolan shrieks, and drops from the saddle, dead. The Light Brigade sweeps over him. Russian guns roar, not only from ahead, but from left and right, sending men and horses tumbling. The Light Brigade speeds up from a trot to a canter.
That's
Then
so
more
bad.
batteries join the barrage. The horsemen break into a full
Oh,
gallop as hot
no.
iron slices through their formation. And onward they ride, through round shot, then shell bursts, then cones of flaying grape shot pellets. Onward through the steel and the dust in the blood, over falling horses and falling comrades, against all odds and all reason. But somehow, some of these 600 reach the Russian guns. They overrun them, hacking with sabers and stabbing with lances, wild and desperate. Still they continue, into Russian Cossacks and Hussars behind, driving them back in a furious melee. But in the end, it's all in vain. The cavalry didn't have the means to destroy or seize the guns they'd captured, so exhausted, outnumbered, and almost surrounded, the survivors finally turned back. Now, few...
Oh my god, is this what inspired? This sounds exactly like, I don't know if I have any more Attack on Titans fans here, but this sounds exactly like the charge they did against the Beast Titan and how most of them, like, died. Is this what inspired it? But at least they got something achieved. They sacrificed a whole bunch of men because they were in a desperate situation, but this was all... this seems very similar, doesn't it?
might have made it out were it not for the efforts of their allies. A French cavalry regiment, the Chasseurs d'Afrique, managed to clear part of the valley, reducing the firepower being directed at the Light Brigade and allowing the survivors to trickle back. Of the roughly 670 British cavalrymen who made the fateful charge, 110 were killed and 161 wounded. Despite leading from the front, Cardigan actually survived.
What?
Though in the midst of the confused fighting, he did abandon the action and rode back to the British lines alone. Not to worry though, that evening he withdrew to his private yacht and took a champagne dinner. The action brought the Battle of Balaclava to a close. The port remained in Alabama, and almost a year later, Sevastopol fell, ending the war. In the months that followed, the dedication and bravery of the cavalrymen who'd made the desperate charge were celebrated, while the chain of aristocratic blunderers who'd ordered it were lambasted by some and exonerated by others. Initially, Raglan blamed Lucan for the debacle, but then he died of dysentery a year later, worn down by campaigning and public criticism of his command. Lucan, in turn, blamed Raglan and Captain Nolan, both of whom were deceased and unable to respond. Cardigan of...
It's always easy to mock a dead man. People know what I'm talking about.
evaded responsibility entirely, and instead used his involvement to enhance his reputation. In an official painting of the action, made shortly after the battle, he insisted the artist show him at the lead. However, the public became increasingly angry over the military incompetence displayed in Crimea, and though the change came slow, the army eventually took measures to ensure wealthy aristocrats couldn't simply buy their way into command. Meanwhile, the Charge of the Light Brigade entered into the pantheon of renowned military incidents, a byword for both courage and foolhardiness. Though regardless of the carnage, many of the survivors stated that they'd have done it again if ordered. Tennyson immortalized them in a poem that became part of school curriculums, and to this day remains a favorite of English verse. Yet, despite the Light Brigade's enshrinement as a patriotic symbol, after the war, the survivors of the charge found that they returned to a life of disability, pain, and poverty. In fact, in 1890, 36 years after the charge, the 20 survivors still living were nearly all paupers. Author Rudyard Kipling, angered by this hypocrisy, decided to write a response to Tennyson's poem.
That always happens, though, doesn't it? It always happens, you know. People go into war, and most of them, if they're not higher ups, they're usually treated like crap and impoverished. You know, we got to treat our veterans better in every country.
O 30 million English that babble of England's might, behold, there are 20 heroes who lack their food tonight. Our children's children are lisping to honor the charge they made, and we leave to the streets and the workhouses the charge of the Light Brigade. And as we all know, humanitarian issues like the one Kipling addresses here are nothing new, which is why we're really happy to tell you about our sponsor today.
Well, now it all makes sense. Jeez. I don't understand why they couldn't say all that in that episode, but yeah, I guess it would have just made the episode a little bit too long, and they have to keep it under a certain amount of time, which is understandable. But yeah, man, that was, it made everything a hell of a lot more interesting, and but you know, and I'm not even surprised about this whole thing. Like the higher ups, like it seemed like this war, it was just awful for ever, especially for England and Russia. I don't know. France is like vengeance and but you know, I mean. Yes, that was my attempt at a French accent. Like it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I'm so glad I waited until now to actually do it, because I was going to actually go over something new because of Napoleon, or the Napoleon trailer being announced. But let me know if you guys think I should do it before Napoleon comes. Well, okay, it's the Haitian Revolution, basically. Would you guys like to see that next? Or would you like to wait until Napoleon comes out around that? Because at the same, I mean, even though it's not really about a Napoleon does have a big impact on the Haitian Revolution. Or, you know, I mean, if I don't really hear an answer, then, you know, maybe I'll just do it after, if the next subject that they're doing is not as interesting. So, I don't know. Let me know in the comments. So please, smash that like button if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content, and subscribe if you think I deserve it. And I'll see you on the next video.